Coming up on the CHASIcast.
I mean, her power politically is unparalleled in a lot of ways.
CHASI lead researcher Chelsea Klassen talks about the surprisingly academic folklore of being a Swiftie.
Looking at celebrity and controversy, how do we conceptualize the controversy that happened with the VMAs? How do we understand heroes and villains in popular culture? How do we talk about race?
It's something sweeter than fiction in this episode of the CHASIcast. From UFV's Community Health and Social Innovation Hub, this is the CHASIcast, a program dedicated to bringing experts and insights to the issues that shape our lives, because words have to matter. Now, here's your host, Dr. Martha Dow.
So it's my pleasure today on our CHASIcast to have Chelsea Klassen. And Chelsea, I have the good fortune of working with you in CHASI as you're the lead researcher there. So it's such a privilege. And obviously you also teach in our Global Development Studies program. Welcome.
Thank you.
And I'd love if you could tell us a little bit about, yourself, your journey, what you do here at UFV. That would be great.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I started my journey at UFV in fall 2011. I had graduated high school and came to university and really didn't know exactly what I wanted to study, but I knew I wanted to do some higher learning. So I did a semester and I saw my friends going off and doing some traveling and getting, experiences outside of Abbotsford. And so I thought I wanted to maybe get some more experiences. So I did a bit of traveling and then I decided I wanted to come back and do some more classes, and I found myself in your Sociology 101 class, Martha, and that class transformed my life. I got to see the world in a way that exposed so many of the things I kind of knew or saw, but didn't have words or language for. So that's what I think, your delivery of the material, as well as just learning about, different perspectives in sociology, really changed me. So I ended up doing a minor in sociology, but I also took a class, GDS 100, Global Development Studies 100. And I love that I can use the global perspective, with the sociological lens. So I like to combine the two. So I decided to major in global development studies, and I actually finished with my 2-year associate in global development, or I think it was international development at the time, and went to Afghanistan for 4 months in 2017. That was another transformative moment in my professional or in my career, I guess, where I guess I had a perspective shift on what development should and shouldn't look like. And so I met an amazing doctor there who had been working in the country for a number of years. And I feel very blessed that she was able to show me a really amazing example of how to do international development well, because it can be done wrong in a lot of ways, as many different disciplines can be used in different ways. And she suggested I do my master's program at the University of Sussex. So she said, her and her husband, she said, if we ever went back to school, this is where we would study. And I thought, I really respect these people, so I think I should take this advice and maybe explore this. So I came back, I had my 2-year degrees, I came back to UFV, finished my bachelor's in global development studies and a minor in sociology and Latin American studies. And in my upper levels, I had the privilege of doing, I think your public policy course, Martha, and a number of other courses that helped shape, my experiences. And then, got into a program, worked in Laos for 6 months at the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, working in alternative development, which was, another kind of shift where I saw both the opportunities that large-scale institutions like the UN can provide for international development professionals, but also some of the constraints and inefficiencies in large systems. So that was a really amazing learning opportunity as well. Then I went back to Afghanistan one more time and got to teach ice skating with an organization called Free to Run. And that was another amazing moment kind of in my professional journey where I really love using sports and activities and seeing women empowered through sports. And not empowered, because I have a problem with that word, and I could go on about this maybe in a minute, but women yeah, maybe we'll come back to empowerment, but I saw that opportunities that sports provides. And so I thought I really would like to do my master's work in women's sports. So we all know what happened in March 2020. I thought, you know what, I want to do my master's, and I think this is a good time because, everything was kind of in upheaval, but I knew that I could still study. That was one thing that was kind of still there. The modality was still unsure. I ended up doing my whole master's online, but yeah, I did my master's in international development, or I think technically it's development studies at University of Sussex at the Institute of Development Studies. So I got to do my master's research on women's sports in Afghanistan. And I did my interviews through Zoom because for multiple reasons I couldn't travel at the time because of COVID, as well as the security issues with Afghanistan. But I found some really interesting findings from that research where I've kind of created a model that was called the aspirational cycle or aspiration cycle, where I saw the effects of one woman being visible in Afghanistan in an athletic pursuit, and that really having resounding effects for other women. So having that visibility, and of course, as we all know now, women are not able to go out freely in public. So the impacts of all my findings, it only highlights how important it is. It was really cool hearing from the women that I spoke to, like even some participants mentioned other participants that had inspired them. So it's a small community of women, but it's also a very strong community. And so, I finished my master's research in July of 2021. August 2021 hits where the Taliban take over. And I was supposed to submit my they call it your thesis, your dissertation in the UK. So I was supposed to submit, basically my final paper. And I tell this story because I want students to feel comfortable that they need to take care of themselves. So at that time, of course, I was not in danger myself, but many of my participants were reaching out to me. Many of my friends from Afghanistan were reaching out to me. And so I really had to make sure that I was trying to support them as best I could with whatever I could provide, which was limited at the time. And of course, Canada has played a role in Afghanistan. So there was a lot of expectation around what response might look like. And we were at an election cycle at that time as well. So unfortunately, international diplomacy was used as a bit of a tool in some ways to, basically Justin Trudeau had announced that he was going to be taking Afghan refugees to Canada, which many people knew I was Canadian. So that just meant a lot of people were reaching out to me. So obviously they were, because they wanted an opportunity to come somewhere safe. And so, that was, I ended up extending my submission just because I was trying to emotionally manage, because master's is, can be stressful enough on its own, but then I had this added layer of wanting to support people. So I just think students need to be mindful of you need to gauge extenuating circumstances and know what's important to deal with at a time. So I guess that's a little bit about my background. And now, after finishing my master's and throughout my master's, as well as after Laos, I was working as a research assistant at CHASI, because I'd graduated from UFV. So I was able to work on some really interesting projects looking at COVID. And then I came back as a research assistant and senior researcher, or senior research assistant, and now lead researcher. And so I've worked on a number of different projects. And a big one that I worked on that stands out to me that I can highlight is the flood report. So working with the team and working alongside Archway, we helped develop a report that looked at the social impacts of the flood. So and then I also teach sessionally at the university. So I teach mostly Introduction to Global Development Studies. And then this past summer, I had the opportunity to teach a class on Afghanistan. So that's my long introduction.
No, that's amazing. It just reminds me that we have to, at some point, just have a conversation on CHASIcast about your work in Afghanistan and where that all stands. Because I learned something new from you all the time. So, and thank you certainly for your very generous attribution around some of our courses. And it's such a pleasure to have you, obviously, in CHASI every day. So that brings us to what we're here to talk about today, which is so interesting. And I love the introduction you just did, because I think it's also this interesting connection to Taylor Swift, right? So could you tell us what brought you to Taylor Swift? And then I've got some questions. We've talked lots in CHASI about all of this. Students have engaged. So yeah, let's start there.
Sure. So when I was in late middle school or early high school, I remember seeing Taylor Swift's music video, Teardrops on My Guitar, which is from her debut album. And that was such a, just a beautiful music video. And just the fact that she wrote all her own music as like I was 14 or 15 at the time, maybe even younger, seeing that, I think I was 13. Yeah. So seeing that was like, wow, that's really cool. She's like a teenager like me, and she's able to write this music, her own music, and tell a story, right? So that story is about a girl who's in love with a boy, and he's her friend, and he doesn't, know she's alive kind of thing, doesn't recognize that she's like pining after him, which is a relatable story to a lot of girls at that age. So I remember that was kind of my first like visual, like, oh my goodness, this is such a cool song and cool story. And she also, the other thing that kind of invited you in was she like named the guy. His name was Drew. And so of course the poor guys in our high school who were named Drew would always get us singing that song to him. But the like, oh, this is like, she's personalizing this. Like she's making it like about somebody in her life. You kind of know like who that person is, was really intriguing. So that's just I think she was just foreshadowing, how how she's connected so well to her audiences. So that was kind of the first introduction, I would say, to Taylor. So yeah. So
then it grows, because as we're sitting here and I'm looking at your T-shirt with Taylor Swift and other sorts of memorabilia on the. So then it obviously grows. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So I also at the time really enjoyed writing songs. So obviously I took so much inspiration from her. So my parents bought me a guitar. I even had a chance to like work at a recording studio in Abbotsford and write some songs and record some songs. So seeing, that was an example that I drew from her. So her next album after debut was Fearless, which is where she got more widespread popularity. So debut was primarily played on like country radio. So that's another thing I could talk about her forever, but the country to kind of pop crossover. So that's where Fearless started having more pop airplay. Although, debut did as well. So that's her first headlining tour. So I got to see that in Seattle. I think I was 15. I went with some friends from high school, and, like even at that tour, her dad was like riding around on his Segway, like handing out guitar picks. So just that, like, and she talks about this, and you probably saw she was recently named Times Person of the Year for 2023. Like she calls it a small family business. So that really, like, if you're playing a stadium tour and you have somebody's parent walking around, obviously he was probably so proud of her and wanted to connect with fans that way. But that's like super memorable. Like I can't think of really any other, celebrity who's maybe family at the level that she is just so engaged with the fans as well. So that's really inviting. And then of course we all saw the Kanye, 2008 VMA award upstaging. So that also, that made you feel really compassionate for her and highlighted a lot of the gendered issues that she was facing and has subsequently faced in the next 15-ish years of her career. So yeah, that all happened while I was still in high school. So yeah.
Interesting. Well, and as soon as you start talking about gender, right? So, I'm thinking sociologically, and I know we've talked. So what, I know one of the things you're interested in is thinking from a course point of view. It sounds like there've been a few courses that have already been delivered. Can you talk a little bit about, lots of people still want to trivialize who she is, what she does. I mean, from an economic point of view, it's just crazy. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the gendered component, I've heard multiple sides to that, right? So some people will say a lot of her strength obviously comes from the fact that she's a woman. She taps into a fan base that, was previously untapped. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that a lot of her success comes from that. But then there's also the side of gender where she's faced, she's had a sexual assault case go through where she sued for $1 and actually won. And it was a symbolic case. And if you watch her documentary, Miss Americana, you really see that that's a turning point in her career where she starts to become more politically vocal. So that intersection of the gender and the political is huge. So I'll read this quote from Times, which says, "Maybe this is the real Taylor Swift effect, that she gives people, many of whom are women, particularly girls, she makes their interior lives matter." So at least I felt that as a fan, and I know my friends as well, like, another quote from the article talks about how, she's so personal, and I alluded to that, right? But it's not, when you listen to the music, you don't necessarily think about what she's experienced at the time. You're able to connect it to what happened to you. So, like, I know my friends and we always talk about, like, she has a very popular song called All Too Well that wasn't a radio success or single from her Red album, but was, has gone on to now win I think a Grammy Award for music video or short film that she's re-released, right? So the re-release of her music, but that song has so much meaning for people, and my friends and I will be like, "Who's your All Too Well song?" Or who's the person you think of when you hear that song? So we know who she, or there's speculation as to who she wrote that song about, but I think that making the interior lives of women matter. And then talking about the economic perspective, I mean, Swift says in the article, "If we have to speak stereotypically about the feminine and the masculine, women have been fed the message that we naturally gravitate towards girlhood, feelings, love, breakups, analyzing those feelings, talking about them nonstop, glitter and sequins. We've been taught that those things are more frivolous than the things that stereotypically gendered men gravitate toward." And she says, "So actually, if we're going to look at this in the most cynical way possible, feminine ideas becoming lucrative means that more female art will be getting made." So, she's tapped into such a cultural moment, I think, in such a successful way economically. So, yeah.
Interesting. So what would that course look like?
Yeah. So I've been working on an outline, and it's hard to put everything in someone's almost 20-year or more career into like a course. But what I've thought about looking at is, going through her albums, talking about adolescence and privilege too, right? Many people will talk about how, while she was not perhaps uber wealthy, she did come from privilege, right? So she even in the article alludes to it as her family as being involved as a small family business. So both her parents come from a marketing and financial background, right? So it's hard to imagine her having the success she has without that support of her family as well, in terms of driving kind of the engine or the machine of her brand. Also looking at feminism in country music. So, she was able to do the successful pop country crossover like Shania was before her, but she also has been exposed to some of the issues that happen with women in country music, right? So we have the Dixie Chicks situation, or the Chicks as they're now called, issue where they talked about George Bush, and that was not well received by the country music, fans and radio, right? So I think that was a huge hesitation for her to get more political. So we'll talk a little bit about, Dolly Parton's role in her writing, as well as other artists too. Looking at celebrity and controversy, how do we conceptualize the controversy that happened with the VMAs? Because there's different perspectives, there's different, how do we understand heroes and villains in popular culture? How do we talk about race, right? How do we talk about age? How do we naturally gravitate towards like villains and heroes in popular culture? Gender, as we've talked about in celebrity, right? So double standards. And, how is this shaped by societal expectations? Another thing I would like to dive into as students is sexuality and celebrity. So for Taylor Swift, there's been a lot of speculation, so much so that there's a whole genre of fans that embrace the gay lore, as it's called, and talk about her and speculate on her sexuality, right? So looking at different factions of the fandom and her roots, right? So her country roots and how that plays a role as well.
Can I ask you just on that, the sexuality piece? It's interesting. So did she foster that? Does she have can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. And again, like I'm speculating here as a fan and as a, who's someone who's just studied a bit of sociology, but there's a couple songs that have, I think, LGBTQ overtones. She also came out with a song called You Need to Calm Down, where at the end she has a message in support of GLAAD. She has lyrics in there that allude to GLAAD. So I think, her music has expressed support. Again, there's critiques and things of how she goes about it, but even her song Lavender, Haze, right? I mean, we've talked about that in CHASI, just that is coded with, LGBTQ plus kind of history that, you would be better to speak to, but that, but I think it's interesting, with her 1989 re-release that she just released in late October, she did actually have a comment about how people even sexualized her female friends. So she realized that there was so much critique on her with going out with different men. And so she decided to surround herself with female friends to try to combat kind of some of those critiques in a way, or try to lessen them. And then she did make a comment about how this era of her career was even sexualized. So again, that could still mean that there's truth to some of the gay lore theories, but it also is her kind of stating like, I think she's not really ever going to maybe tell everything, because she doesn't do that with any type of relationship she's in. So I don't know if that makes sense. But.
It does. And I just quick, and then I know, I'm sure it sounds so interesting. To be honest, I'd love to take your course. But so she has her songs. Mm-hmm. Is she also out politically in other ways? Yeah.
So she is quite supportive of Democratic candidates in Tennessee, which is, I believe, her kind of state of voting, I would imagine. I know she has multiple homes, so I can't say for sure. But like when she released that voter registration opened, they saw, I think this year it was about 35,000 people registered, more so than they expected or something along those lines. So, I mean, her power politically is unparalleled in a lot of ways. I know she, if you watch Miss Americana, there's quite a heartbreaking scene where her family and managers are trying to tell her not to speak out on the side of Democrats for fear of her safety. But then she actually lists the different bills and things that the Republicans in that state are supportive. And one of them is, I'm going to get the exact title wrong, but something around supporting women who are being stalked or who are being harassed. And she says to her managers and her family, like, I'm a victim of this. Like, I have stalkers. I've had, harassment happen to me. And so, like I think that was maybe a turning point for her where she started to become more active politically. And then, I mean, if we're talking about political, we can't, in the US particularly, not talk about the economic. So the Super Bowl games that she's attending now that she's been linked with Travis Kelce have seen the highest ratings since the Super Bowl, right? Like, she has made something that is, perhaps at the pinnacle or top of American popular culture, even more popular somehow. And so, yeah, I think that's, and she opened her Eras Tour in Glendale, which had the Super Bowl, and she brought in more economic traffic than the Super Bowl itself, which is like, for America, I feel like saying quite a lot. So, yeah.
And yet still so much resistance. But before we get to that, because I thought that's a nice place for you to have some comment as well, I think it's interesting what you just said. So in the discussion about stalking and harassment and legislation, she's seen herself in other people's stories. And that's kind of what you talked about, what many fans gravitate to her because they see themselves in the storytelling. So it feels like there's some reciprocity. And I don't know, I haven't been to a concert, I don't listen, so you're the expert, but it feels relational in an interesting way.
Yeah, I mean, for myself, having been a fan of her since I was, in middle school, we've also grown up together. So it's like I have a soundtrack for each era of my life, which feels really cool. And going through those, she literally released the song 15 when I turned 15. So it's like when you're learning to drive and you go on your first date and kind of, milestones that happen in those few years. And she's, she knows that fans, for example, fought, not physically, but with technology to try to get tickets. So in the Times article, she talks about how she knew how hard fans had worked to get those tickets. So she was going to work just as hard so that when people walked away, they were like, from the concert, they were like, oh my gosh, that was worth every moment. So you feel that she puts care into everything she does for her fans. And that I think she's a perfectionist. I think that she cares so much about what fans need and what they want. And so, yeah, you really feel that as a fan, that it's not when she's experimenting or, cause she's shapeshift genres so much. She's gone from country to pop to more, Reputation would be considered pop, but it's grittier. Then she has Folklore and Evermore, which are much more indie. And somehow she's managed to bring add fans. I don't know many artists who can shapeshift like that and not lose some fans along the way. So I would argue she's not only bringing fans with her, but she's kind of changing the face of popular music. And we're willingly going along with it. I think everyone's quite excited to see what's going to happen next. With this re-release of her music and just the 1 minute version on that, her music, her masters. So her original 6 albums were owned by, the masters were owned by her record label, which got sold to Scooter Braun. And there's, some bad blood between those two. And so, she has decided to, re-record her music because her contract allowed her to do that. And of course, Kelly Clarkson actually sparked that, tweeted Taylor, and it's very sweet because Taylor, every time she releases a re-record, she sends Kelly Clarkson some flowers. But all that to say is that fans will follow and listen to these re-records now because she's releasing vault tracks. She's releasing, she's introspective, looking back, or retrospective, I guess, looking back on her career. And so she just keeps doing and giving so much to the fans about these vault tracks that were never before heard. And some of the songs you're like, how did you not release this song? It's a classic hit, but yeah, she's keeping us on our toes always. And that's so as a fan, it's so engaging to have that relationship with her. Yeah.
I interrupted you in terms of, is there anything else that sort of you think about the course? And then I thought in the little bit of time we have left, I'd love to ask you a bit about so much resistance.
Yeah, sure. Just a couple more things. I mean, I think in her documentary, Miss Americana, she talks about some mental health stuff. She talks about, some eating disorder types of things. And I think for many people, that was also a relatable point where you're like, oh, you're so famous and popular and beautiful, and you still have some of the same struggles that people have, and it affects both genders, but it often affects women. And so, yeah, she even in a song of her most recent album, Midnights, talks about how she starved her body, had parties, was just trying to get people's, love and adoration. But at the end, the song's called You're on Your Own, Kid. And that's actually become, a very fan favorite song. And so that one, I think, we'll talk a bit about like health and well-being and how she's also has a few other songs. Soon You'll Get Better, which is a song she wrote about her mom's bout with cancer. She wrote a song called Epiphany, which looks at people's experiences of COVID and alluding them to kind of some experiences during war. So she talks about doctors. Bigger Than the Whole Sky is another song that she wrote that hasn't been confirmed that it's about this, but if you read the lyrics, could be about a miscarriage. And then she has a couple other songs about other things that like suicide and things like that. So again, it's not explicit, it's coded, but I don't know how you write such popular pop songs about these things, even something like Anti-Hero. So we're going to explore some of that with health and well-being. And then we'll talk to, I'm hoping in the course, the other thing I would just highlight is this like Swiftonomics. Like I think I'm quite curious to see what Vancouver's social and economic impact will be from Taylor Swift. I think there's a lot of opportunities there for municipalities and the city to really capitalize on promoting Taylor Swift as a marketable, component of the city for the few or like the week or so before she comes in December 2024. So, yeah.
Great. So maybe the last thing I'd love to hear you talk about is this resistance, right? So, and it's whether it's trivialized or whether it's simply, why do we have so much importance on a celebrity? And I think you've spoken to that an awful lot about why, but I wonder if you'd, speak to that. How do we understand that?
Yeah, the resistance. I think it's sometimes just good old like fashion misogyny, like a powerful woman. Because I've heard comments like, well, she has ghostwriters, or, oh, she, like Kanye made her. There's a lot of resistance to, Kanye made her famous, and he's even said that himself. But yeah, at the end of the day, like, we saw this summer, right, with a trifecta of female kind of economic juggernauts with Beyonce's Renaissance tour, which was also phenomenal. We saw the Barbie movie, and we had kind of the Eras tour, just reinvigorating the economy and basically women entertainers and entertainment targeting women, like holding up the economy. So I don't think like if people are taking up space that was traditionally taken up by different parts of demographics, like I think there will be some resistance to that. I think people still trivialize women's feelings. Like, again, Taylor Swift does not discriminate on who can relate to her music, but she is often writing from the female experience. So like, that's, I guess the takeaway is people will resist because they don't see it as valid. And that's both the critique or the resistance, and it's her strength, I think, that people feel heard, people feel validated, people feel like, oh, there's someone out there who can relate to me. And also like COVID, I think I've seen some interesting economic statistics about how she had regularly toured about every 2 or 3 years, and COVID kind of had this backlog of like tour experiences that left people wanting more. But I think people had time to kind of dive into her music, and she released 2 albums almost right back to back. And I was just talking to my friend yesterday about that, actually. Like, we're like, oh, we don't really feel like we know the Evermore, her 9th album as well, because she had just released Folklore 2 months before. And so just that giving us an indie, like feelings driven, much more mellow album during that time. Like she also somehow can kind of just read what culture, she both shapes what culture is and can read what culture does. And I think, yeah, that I guess I kind of got sidetracked there, but with respect to resistance, I think it really comes down to a lot of just the patriarchy and resisting women having those top kind of roles. And yeah, so that would probably be what I would end with.
Well, it's great. And I actually love what you said about, the shaping culture and also just reading culture and just being attentive. And I think your example of what she released during COVID is such a great example of that. Well, that's great. It's been so much fun just to listen to you talk and with such insight. And I think we've certainly seen other universities offering courses. It's such an interesting sort of topic, if you will, because it's interdisciplinary, as you talked about it as well. So yeah, I look forward to the course.
Hopefully it'll come to fruition.
Great. Well, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Martha.
Our knowledge mobilization team includes Jeff Mydro-Birch, Kristen Bentz, Andrea Morehouse, Frankie Fowle, Mara Penner, Sharon Strauss, and Emma Hones. Our theme music is by Chris Micah. I'm Dr. Martha Dow. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time here on the CHASIcast.
The CHASIcast is a production of the Community Health and Social Innovation Hub at the University of the Fraser Valley in Abbotsford, British Columbia.